Hello, dear viewers. Welcoming you all to our Team Unicorns YouTube channel. This is International Chess Coach Baivab Mishra from Premier Chess Academy. Welcoming you all to our YouTube channel. So, as we discussed in our last video about the Lucena position, today we are going to look at another important rook endgame position that is called the Philidor position. Usually, the Philidor position is very common where white has a extra pawn or black has an extra pawn with a king and rook, and the other side have a king and rook to defend the position. Usually we saw that in Lucena position the side having the extra pawn usually converts that into a win, but in Philidor position the defending side has some defending techniques. That is what we are going to look here, how to avoid the Lucena or how to save the game when you're down on a pawn using the third rank defense in the Philidor position. So it dates back to the 1860s where famous Grandmaster Philidor divides this idea, and that's why the position is named after the Grandmaster Philidor, and the position is called the Philidor position. So it's a very instructive idea, guys. So please thoroughly look into the video to know the intricacies of the rook endgames. So usually in this position it's black to move. So what would black do to save the game? So before we ask what would black do to save the game, let's ask what would white do to win the game. So usually white plan is very simple here. White wants to move the king to f6, then give a check with the rook, get the king out of the e8 place and push the pawn to e6 with a check, and then usually get the Lucena position with the pawn on the 7th rank. White would be easily able to win the game. It's also very important to look at one part or one thing here, is that this pawn divides the board into two parts. One part is the long side having 4 squares, and one part is on the short side having 3 places. So usually in this kind of positions, the rook, as we have learned, can start giving checks from the behind. It can also start giving checks from the sides. But the point is, usually the rook should start giving checks on the longer side. As we will see, if it's on the shorter side, the technique does not work. So let's see what happens if black just normally waits and gives white the option and waits for white to make a plan. Suppose say now black goes rook to c2 and just waits. So what white would do? White would go king to f6. And black has to go rook to f2 check, making sure the king does not stay here and stops him from pushing the pawn to e6 or giving him rook 8 check. But now the king goes to e6, and as you could see, there are no more checks from behind. So black obviously starts to find a way to give checks from the side, as we'll discuss, but then it leads to a checkmate with rook 8. So first black has to move the king out, but then white gives a check on a8. Now the king is totally out of the position. King to e7, and after the rook moves to b2, pawn to e6, and black can't give checks on the side because the king is able to chase out the rook, and once the rook moves, e7, and there's no way for black to stop the pawn from promoting. So this is exactly what white wants, or this is exactly the way white wants to win here. It's a very common technique as we see, and if in this position black does not give side checks and starts to keep the rook on behind the pass pawn, white usually tries to go for the Lucena position, and as we could see after king f6 there is a check threat, so king to g7 comes out, but as we have already discussed, this position is winning. White has to just get the rook to a1, make sure the king is cut off from the other half of the board. Now rook suppose say goes to pates on d3, not letting the king escape, but then and once the king moves, we do the same technique of Lucena, rook to g4, we build up the bridge, and finally you could see that the white king would be able to interfere the checks using its own rook on e4. So usually these are the winning methods that white has in this kind of position. So black just can't like wait here passively. White would end up winning the game. So black has to do something actively, which is very important in this kind of positions. So what would black do? Usually white's basic idea of king f6 and king e6 are very strong. So how could black get this both the squares under control? That's where Philidor come up with an idea. The idea is called a third rank defense or the sixth rank defense. What he does, he moves the black rook to b6, making sure now the white king would never be able to come into the game. So if the white king does not come into the game, this pawn will not be able to promote. You can give checks, but still the black king just waits on the e8 and e7 place, and there's no other way. And if white waits with the rook, black also keeps waiting with the rook on the sixth rank. The only way to make progress in the position for white is to move the pawn to e6, making sure now the king can go to f6. But once the pawn moves to e6, this is the exact right time where the rook starts giving checks from behind. Now since the pawn has moved to e6, there is no way for this king to hide, and black rook starts giving checks from behind and keeping the rook behind the pass pawn. This is the exact technique, and this technique is called the sixth rank or third rank defense, where you put the rook on the sixth rank or on the third rank and make sure that the king is not able to move forward. And once the pawn moves to the sixth rank, once we know that the king can't hide from the checks anymore, we bring the rook down or bring the rook behind the pass pawn. So usually what happens in this kind of positions, you have to make sure that the Philidor position happens when the pawn is and the king are on the fifth rank. This is a very important point to look at, and you place your rook on the sixth rank, and if it's from the black side and black king and pawn on the fourth rank, we have to place our rook on the third rank. So these are the techniques that are there, but there's also another interesting play to this. Even if this position was white to play, in this position now it's black to move, but even if in this position it's white to move and white goes king f6, there is still a way to make a draw, and this is exactly what like Philidor was not able to come up with. But later in the analysis, or later in the, like when the position got analyzed for a bit long, the ideas were very clear here. Black has to stop the white pawn from going to e6. That's the clear idea. And if you go rook f1, it does not really work, because after this the rook is easily able to drag the king out and white is easily able to get the Lucena position. Since the white rook is defending the longer side, it usually leads to a win. But yeah, if the black rook was on the longer side, still there is a lot more analysis to it, which is not the part of this video, guys. So we'll not discuss that, but we'll look into a more subtle way of stopping the white's idea of e6. Here what black does follows the principle of putting the rook behind the pass pawn. So black goes rook to e1, and you could see there is no way to move the pawn to e6 now, right now, because if e6, we could start giving checks from the behind. The king can't hide. And the main idea of putting the rook on e1 is that when the rook gives a check, king comes to d7, white can't push the pawn forward because the rook and king both are stopping the pawn. So this technique is a technique that is used when the Philidor position goes wrong or the white king has reached on the sixth rank. We use the technique of putting the rook behind the pawn and making sure we don't let the pawn come forward. In the previous example, we are looking at we don't let the king come to the sixth rank. Now we stop the pawn from getting to the sixth rank, and if white gives a check with the rook, we again fall back to the same e8 place, and there's nothing that could run. If king to e8, a king to e6 here, we just go king to f8, gives a check, we move the king to g7, same technique. White can't move the king forward because it lets the pawn get captured, so white has to move the king to d6. But then again, if the king comes to d6, our main goal or main focus is to stop the pawn from coming to e6, so we go king to. So these are the two techniques that the defending side could use. One by putting the rook on the like on the first rank and putting it behind the pawn and not letting the pawn go to the sixth rank, or another technique is we could directly let the king stop from going to the sixth rank by putting the rook itself on the sixth rank. So these are the two techniques in the Philidor position to defend the position, guys. It's very interesting and very instructive that you know these ideas, because by knowing this you could save the game, you could save half of your point when you get into this kind of positions with a pawn down. Usually your opponent will think he's winning, but yes, he's not winning. So having an idea of the endgame is very important. So I would also suggest all the kids to study endgames. If you study endgames, your understanding of the game develops. So hope you love this video, hope it's instructive. Do subscribe to our channel of Team Unicorns to see such more interesting videos. Do like and subscribe our channel, guys, and we will come up with more interesting in-game videos in the near future. Hope you all enjoyed this. Bye bye. See you soon in our next video.